I've been making bread for a long time, but I've got myself a bit of a new challenge here because I have to make a soft white loaf of bread. Typically, when I'm making bread, I'm making a nice wholemeal rye loaf. I have a good motivation to make some soft white bread though. It's because my wife might like to eat it. I'm trying to get her away from eating instant noodles for breakfast. They are so bad, they're so full of sodium and all kinds of preservatives and chemical flavouring and stuff like that. So I figure if I can make a really nice soft white loaf of bread, she'll appreciate it. And then we know exactly what's going into the bread. A little while ago, she bought a white loaf from the supermarket, and I said, you really shouldn't eat that stuff. It's so full of chemicals. It's similar to the noodles, I think, but she said, okay, if you make me a soft white loaf, I'll eat it for breakfast. I've been making bread for so long I can't remember when I started, but the only time I've really made white bread is to make hamburger buns. So I decided to see if I could adapt that recipe and make a loaf out of it, because my hamburger buns are always nice and soft and fluffy. So here's the recipe that I used for my hamburger buns, and I'm now going to use it to cook a loaf. I'll bake this loaf in my bread maker. I have to knead it by hand because that part of the bread maker doesn't function properly anymore. But if this loaf works out well, I'll be certainly looking to bake it in our wood-fired pizza oven as well. So the recipe is 250 mils of warm water, an egg, 2 tablespoons of oil, and we use coconut oil because it's the least harmful, apparently. Half a teaspoon of salt, it's not very much salt. The recipe calls for 1/4 cup of sugar, but I've used honey as a replacement because we're trying to cut down on processed sugars. And 2.5 teaspoons of yeast, which is a reasonably good amount of yeast, to go into 3 1/4 cups of white flour. So let's see how this turns out. I start with lukewarm water in the bowl, and then I usually add my yeast first, but for some reason this time I added the egg first, and it created a bit of a problem because when I added the yeast it kind of went a bit lumpy, it clumped together, but adding the yeast before the egg is a better idea. Then I add the honey, mix that in well, and then the oil, 2 tablespoons of oil. I'm using coconut oil, but you can use other types of cooking oils. This is possibly the least healthy thing going into this loaf of bread. And then add the flour, probably about half of it. Mix it in, mix it well, and then add the rest of the flour. And lastly, I put the salt in, a very small amount of salt. Then give it a good mix with the wooden spoon, and then get my bowl scraper. Let's clean the spoon up a bit, then just really scrape around the edges of the bowl and mix it all in. And then just mix it all in really carefully and well. Then get my hand in there and mix it a bit. And then open it out onto the bench and start kneading. So I'll knead it sort of traditionally like this initially, and then I have learned a different technique from a guy that I've seen on the internet who is a fabulous baker, really entertaining to watch. I'll drop his name in here as I can't pronounce it. And then just, spend the time just kneading, and then using this slap technique that I've learned, where I slap the dough down on the bench and then pull it out and back and fold it over itself. Typically when I'm doing this with my regular loaf that I make, the dough mix is a lot wetter. This mixture is quite dry compared to what I'm used to, so it was a little bit different to work with. And certainly working with a white flour only loaf is much easier to get it to really build strength and shape and texture than it is with a wholemeal rye loaf that I typically make. I just sort of work the dough a little bit like this, sort of pull it round, get the top of it just stretched nicely, make it into a nice ball. And then I'll just cover it with the bowl and go away for 5 or 10 minutes. Do my dishes, clean my utensils up, and then come back to it, and it's feeling quite different. It's got a bit more body to it, it's got a bit more air in it, and then I continue to slap and fold it and knead it, slap and fold it some more, knead it some more. Until I get the feeling I like in the dough. And I'm sorry, I can't really describe that. It's something you've got to learn by yourself. And then I put it in the pan for the bread maker and get a wet towel, a damp towel, and place it over the top. And then that is ready to go into my dehydrator at a low temperature. So this is just a dehydrator that I dehydrate tomatoes and other fruit in, and it's also great for helping proof the bread. So I'll leave that sit in there for 20 minutes, came back and checked it, left it for another 10, and hello, it's looking good. So it's time to come out. Take the towel off, and that's risen just the right amount. I don't want it to be over the top of the pan, because when I put it in the bread maker to cook, it will continue to rise. So pop the lid down on there, put the setting in to cook it for an hour, set it, and go away and do something else for an hour, and come back again and see what we've got. It's looking pretty good, smelling fantastic, and wow, look at that. A little bit of steam fogged the camera up a wee bit, but that is a nicely baked loaf of bread. Still extremely hot because it's just finished cooking, so I'm just being really, really careful, because if I touch that pan, I get burnt fingers. I just pop it out, and it's come out quite easily. And that is a lovely big loaf of bread, so I'm pretty confident that what's inside there is going to be good. It looks nice, the crust feels nice and crispy, and now the test is cutting it. So this is a few hours later once the bread's had a chance to cool down, because I don't like to cut a very fresh hot loaf of bread. And that looks pretty good to me. Let's see what my wife thinks. What do you think, darling? You can eat that for breakfast?
Sure, it's like very soft for me because I like softly.
Sure, nice and soft, but yeah. I think also more healthy than your mama noodles and
honey.
Yeah, because I used honey for this for the sugar instead of sugar. So it's very good. Nice, healthy loaf of bread with no preservatives, no chemical, no flavouring, nothing unhealthy.
Thank you very much for doing that for me.
You're welcome.